All right, so let's look at Africa now. 1100 to 1980. All right, so we're going to start off by looking at Great Zimbabwe. Okay, so it's the two architectural images from the image set, and Zimbabwe, we're kind of in southern Africa here. And here's our image. So the Conical Tower of Great Zimbabwe here. Great Zimbabwe was a spectacular inland trading empire historically. They were heavily involved with trade across the Indian Ocean, and there was a booming gold economy in this part of the world. Not too far geographically from Great Zimbabwe, you have long-standing evidence of gold mining. And we have in other settlements that are somewhat close in proximity, we have spectacular examples of objects made of gold. So we know that this was really a booming economic center, and the cultures that resided at Great Zimbabwe, it's been suggested, are related to the Shona. The Shona are a contemporary, in relative terms, culture that you find in southern Africa today. Maybe there's a direct link. Nonetheless, we can talk about the settlement of Great Zimbabwe, that this was really built as a capital. If you expand across the region, we'll see that there are over 200 ruins fairly close by. And this one is the most spectacular. When this was first discovered by Western individuals, it was attributed to non-Africans because Africans weren't sophisticated enough to do this, right? Yeah, exactly. But we, of course, know that that's not the case. And the word itself, Zimbabwe, if we talk about it in English, it means something like a judicial center or kind of a royal center of authority, okay? Here's a nice aerial view of Great Zimbabwe, and this is, like I mentioned, the largest of the ruins throughout the region. And we have our great enclosure there at the bottom. So, in terms of this whole area, Great Zimbabwe is broken up or typically kind of divided into three sections. You have your hill complex, your valley complex, and the great enclosure. So I just want to take a few minutes to kind of run down each of those, and we can kind of talk about what's going on. So the hill complex is the oldest, and dates to about 1250. And this is a pretty spectacular place because the courses of stone that were laid here were added to a natural cave. And the cave is really amazing because even to this day you can go there, and if you shout in the cave, you can hear it all the way down in the valley. It's like a natural megaphone. Pretty spectacular feature that we have there. And we have all these wonderful courses of smooth rock that sort of connect these different natural elements. And there's a lot of little enclosures and chambers. And you can see it's pretty immense. The walls up here are up to 30 feet tall. Okay, so it's a very immense place. And within the hill complex were found 7 monoliths, 7 steatite soapstone pillars that all had a bird of prey carved at the top. And those are significant. We'll talk about those more when we kind of talk about the great enclosure and what we see there. So the great enclosure, you can see a little bit later, 1450, and it's huge. It's 300 feet in diameter, and again, the walls fluctuate anywhere from 20 to 30 feet high, and this is all made of local granite, okay? So in terms of our source material, it's locally sourced, and the absolutely astounding thing about it is that no mortar was used, all right? Today is what, 2015? And it's still standing, and in fact, the sections that have crumbled are sections that were held up with wooden lintels for entryways. That's how absolutely spectacularly engineered this place was, that it still stands today. So if we look at the great enclosure, kind of a cutaway, we have a lot of interior walkways and passages throughout there, and you've got these sort of turrets and towers there, solid towers. There wasn't anything like storing grain or something you could go up into. These are solid masses that we're talking about. And again, there are some interior spaces in the enclosures that had raised platforms in them, where you had a floor of clay that was kind of buffed to make it really, really smooth. And those in there, when they were first kind of discovered by the West, were kind of covered with little figures that are kind of phallus-shaped, but some of them also had indications of breasts on them. These little kind of interesting little figures were on top of this platform. And some scholars today are trying to make a connection with another more contemporary culture in southern Africa called the Venda also in this part of the world, who use figures that are also kind of phallus-shaped during female initiation practices, okay? So perhaps there's some kind of a continuity there for what it's worth. And there's just kind of an illustration of what this place would have looked like at one time. Kind of if we're talking about formal elements here, the significance have to do with the different patterns that we find in the walls. And you can see we have these wonderful chevron patterns there that are running in courses. There's also sections of the great enclosure where there's a sort of black, darker stone that goes along in a stripe, usually in two parallels, that really kind of offsets it against the rest of the granite. We can talk about that a little bit. Scholars have suggested that in the case of these darker courses, linking it maybe to zebras with the sort of black and white lines, maybe that's the case. There have been bowls that were found in this site that have zebras depicted on the exterior. So, there is some kind of a significance there, maybe. With the chevron patterns there, we have some interesting connections with those monolith birds that I mentioned. I'll show you one here in just a minute. The chevron has been linked with sort of maybe the path of an eagle in flight, lightning, rain, okay? I don't think it's too far of a stretch to bring in any of those suggestions, because there are a lot of cultures in this part of the world where kings and especially queens are viewed as having the ability to bring rain. The realm of the rain queen is right up here from cultures that are still very active today. There's another view just to give us an idea of the size that we're talking about here. Spectacular.
Well, so, sorry, going back, what were you referring to when you were talking about stripes?
I didn't have an image of that. That was just kind of talking about the different types of patterning that we see here. I think for the case for your AP sets, you do have an image that has the chevron pattern. So, let's talk about that a little bit.
A question about
Yeah.
the scale.
Uh-huh.
Do you know, do we know how it was created to such a scale? Like what kind of technology was used to create that kind of scale?
No. Not anything that I've ever come across. It's certainly an immense scale.
But not
Right. Not like what we're talking about in Egypt and all of that, but it's a good question.
Why the need for such an enclosure?
That comes down to then the context. We know that this was a trading center. We know that because there's gold that's been mined there for centuries. And then when we get to the valley ruins, our third little piece of the pie of what Great Zimbabwe is, we see that this was a booming trade center, that we have evidence of Chinese porcelain there. We have found beads from the Indian subcontinent there. There are metals that were imported. So, the idea is that, one, this was linked to, this is sort of an economic capital, but it's also viewed as the political capital, that this was very likely where kings, rulers, those in authority were residing here. And that's,
Is this like military fortification, or is this like bank fortification?
well, I think it could have to do with some kind of a protective element, certainly, but also to overwhelm. And that's where we can kind of talk about these a little bit more. There were 8 of these that were found at Great Zimbabwe, and each one of them are different. Each one of the features of these birds of prey are just a little bit different. And they have these sort of interesting stylizations. If you look at the overall form, all of them have this sort of triangular shape. Okay, and you can see how the neck has been elongated, the wings have been shortened a little bit, the legs have been elongated to make this kind of broad triangular form there. If you look at the details, you'll see that it mixes avian and human features. The musculature is often human. There's a number of them that have human lips on them. Some of the claws will end in human toes. So there's this interesting blending of animal and human features there. And these stylizations have led scholars to suggest that maybe these represent past rulers, past kings, which brings us back again to where the suggestion that this was indeed the capital of this region because of its immensity compared to all the other ruins around it, and linking it to cultures that are still thriving today, like the Shona, whose kings are personified by the eagle. And we can talk about other contemporary beliefs where the eagle is viewed as sort of a messenger from God, this sort of intermediary that can go between realms. It can land on the earth, it can go in the sky. And if you look closely, what do we have here again? We have these interesting chevrons that are showing up again on every one of these monoliths that have been found at the hill complex and in the great enclosure. So making these connections, perhaps with a significance based on what we're seeing in the structure. All right. Just a couple other images, surprisingly strong and just spectacular. I mean, look at that corridor. It is amazing. And no mortar. The skill that goes into shaping this granite is mind-blowing. Yeah. Let's jump back there. So, you're talking right there. Yep.
What would that have been used for, the corridor?
What's that?
What would it have been used for? It wasn't like an entrance per se.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of passageways here that lead to other spaces, and what scholars have suggested, you know, some of these spaces terminated with the raised platform that had those sort of falliform figures. I've seen a few works that suggest that have kind of attempted to label some of these areas. One was being linked to a female space, a place linked with childbearing. Yeah.
Just, we talk about scholars and what they've said.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't heard you mention writing. Is there something in a text form that explains any of this? And if not, why not? It's 1400 CE.
Yeah, there are on the bibliography list. I think I put down 4 different texts, probably the most well-respected of the texts that really go into great detail. And
Text from this period then, as opposed to from a scholar who's studying?
no primaries.
Okay.
Yeah. Probably the best evidence comes from the archaeological record, and there's a guy named Martin Hall that has done extensive archaeological work in the area and really kind of makes a strong case for that link between this being an economic center and linking it to the Asian subcontinent, kind of working with that type of evidence.
Is there a reason for no written documents?
You know, from primary sources, from
So is nobody's writing about Great Zimbabwe or that they're going there, or
Mm.
Was there no writing even among the people living there?
Not at this time.
So could this be considered, I mean, obviously not date-wise, but prehistoric in terms of they don't have writing? Or do we have record of their writing?
You know, I would probably be hesitant to go as far as to kind of put it in that prehistoric, to couch it that way. I think I would probably think that it's more that we just don't have those sources. I don't know the answer, though. I don't know the answer. You know, maybe if we look at, and this is maybe a stretch, but some of the Chinese treasure fleets that are going around at 14, you know, yeah, you know, we know that there's that a lot of that source material was making its way here. That might be a source to look at, but that's not anything that I've ever come across. But certainly, given the extent and the interaction that we see with the visual evidence, there's a possibility for it. All right. Last piece of the pie, our valley ruins here. Again, 1450, so this is kind of contemporary with the great enclosure. And throughout the valley, you have a lot of sort of low stone walls, and it's located between the hill and the great enclosure, and multiple structures. And this is where we've found the most spectacular evidence. There's been an enormous cache of Chinese porcelain. This is where we find the beads from Southeast Asia. So a lot of the evidence that proves international trade and interaction going on in this part of the world. And that's where we can then talk about sort of the why and the what. What is this? It was certainly a trade center. I think the visual evidence suggests that this is a royal center, some kind of a palace. It's even been suggested that the hill ruins with that sort of megaphone in the cave even today is still used by local populations as a sacred site. And all across southern Africa, even in South Africa where I was doing my work, caves are still seen as very spiritually vital places. And probably the most well-accepted function has to do with the hill ruins as being sort of a religious center, perhaps where a king or a religious leader was residing, being able to speak out over the community, the great enclosure being linked more with royal residence, and our valley ruins being that economic center, the place where individuals are living and interacting and trade is taking place. Okay. I think we have another look at the valley there. All right.